All right, so welcome. My name is Steve Easton. I'm a professor at the University of Wyoming College of Law. Our participants will be introduced as they, either as they come before you or at the end of the trial. So the format of our historic trials is that we take an event from history, we stay as true as possible to the actual historic record. We'll talk after the trial about a couple of minor little things we had to do to make it work in one trial, but this is based, what you are going to see is all based on the actual history of this event. So what we do, though, is we take modern law and modern rules of evidence and those sorts of things back with us in our time machine ride. So we'd ask you now to get in the time machine and go back to, actually our trial is in 1888. It is about events, of course, in 1885. We will have one break. Actually, it's called a recess in court. We'll have one recess at the close of the plaintiff's case. And then after that recess, we will go from the defendant's presentation of evidence to until the jury is dismissed. And if you stay in the room when the jury is dismissed, we have a few announcements and that sort of thing to make, other than the fact that the jury will be out of the room. I'm looking for Judge James to make sure she's ready. Oh, Judge James is ready? All right, so it's up to Mr. Clerk, it's all yours.
Oyez, oyez. The Wyoming Territorial Court of the United States Territories is now in session. The Honorable Nina Day will preside. All persons having business with the Honorable Court, please draw near. All right.
I don't know how it's broadcast. Thank you. Okay. Ming Lee on behalf of Ali, decedent, versus the Union Pacific Railroad Company, parent corporation, the Union Pacific Coal Company, its subsidiary, and Does 1 through 20. The plaintiff in this case is represented by Tyson Logan and Paige Anderson, seated at that table. And the defendants are represented by Jim Phillips and Dawson Osborne. This is a wrongful death action. The plaintiff, Ming Lee, asserts that the death of her husband, Ali, during the Chinese massacre was the result of negligence on the part of the defendants. She is seeking damages against the defendants for his death. At this time, I need the jurors to please stand and be sworn to faithfully hear and try this case. Would you stand and raise your right hands, please? Do you swear that you shall well and truly try the matter in issue and a true verdict render according to the evidence, so help you God? Go ahead and be seated. All right. The plaintiff will now present his opening statement.
May I please report?
Counsel?
Counsel. Union Pacific has finally gone too far. For years, UP has been valuing people under money. UP has been sending in Chinese immigrant laborers to work with white miners in order to increase their profits and cut costs, even though they know that tensions between whites and Chinese would grow and explode. UP essentially lit a fuse that would detonate 10 years after 1875 in the events that occurred on September 2nd, 1885. This is the story of how that happened. In 1875, UP issued a round of wage cuts for the miners in their coal company. The miners subsequently went on strike, and UP had to do something about that. So they hired Chinese immigrants to come in as strikebreakers. After the Chinese immigrants had come to work for UP, in 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed. This act allotted that Chinese laborers were no longer allowed to come to the United States in order to work. In between 1882 and 1885, the date of the riot, there were more wage cuts enacted by UP. UP then decided in 1885 to stop hiring white miners altogether. Of course, the white miners were enraged by this. They went to work even though many of their companions and colleagues had lost their jobs. Because of this, UP and tensions within the mines were extremely, extremely high. But to add to that, the conditions within the mine were horrible. The mines were hot. The mines were sweaty. We should have pictures. They were tight, they were claustrophobic, and all the while, white miners and Chinese miners were battling for the best rooms. UP knew that with tensions boiling over in 1885, they had to start rehiring white miners, or else something really, really horrible was going to happen. The tension was so high that there was bound to be some sort of incident. UP had seen public airings of the grievances that these white miners had shared with the company over and over again for the past decade. These grievances came out in posters like this that say, "Get out immediately or else," and posters that said, "Chinese, get out, get out." UP employees aired their grievances to upper management through strikes, through public sentiments of ill will. Yet still, what did UP do? They did nothing. And because of this inaction, this negligence in UP's decision to not try to fix the inadequate working conditions and to mitigate the tensions that were between the white and Chinese miners, September 2nd, 1885 occurred. September 2nd, 1885. A day that will forever live in the minds and hearts of the Rock Springs community. A day that will forever live in the heart, a day that will forever be in the lives of those who lost loved ones. The day started out normally with white and Chinese miners heading to work. They entered rooms within the mine, but suddenly a fight occurred. The fight escalated quickly over who was going to get the certain rooms within the mine because some rooms were better than others. This fight escalated so quickly and help was sought, but UP management did not arrive on site until 30 minutes after the fight had started. UP management came, and what did he come just in time for? To see a bunch of miners that were seriously injured and one miner that was laying on the floor, dead. And what did he do as he looked at these injured miners and a dead miner laying on the floor? He wanted to get everyone else back to work. So who did he ask to make the mob that was really, really upset and wanted to go pillage Rock Springs to go back to work? Not only, but one of the original miners who had started that fight. And when that didn't work, and the angry mob poured out of the mine to go pillage Rock Springs, UP management did nothing. They didn't catch up to the mob until about an hour after they had left the mines. Until about an hour after they had left the mines. Unfortunately, that day was a day where 28 Chinese men were killed because this mob was so angry. They went through Rock Springs and they burned down Chinatown. They looted, they pillaged, they murdered, they assaulted. During all of this, a humble businessman, Ali, Mr. Ali, was hiding behind the counter of his laundromat. They subsequently pulled him out from behind the counter of his laundromat and shot him in the head. You will learn about the man that Mr. Ali was. Him and his wife moved to Rock Springs in order to build a better life for themselves. They moved to work hard and to be honest people within the community. Ali was originally a miner for UP, but saw an opportunity to open a laundromat and service his community. He serviced miners and other patrons from around Rock Springs alike. Today, you will hear the defense argue that UP had nothing to do with this riot whatsoever. You will hear defense argue that they had nothing to do with Ali and his killing. But remember, as you listen to this argument, that UP was the one who started this riot 10 years ago, when they decided not to act, when they had angry American workers complaining to them about the deplorable conditions and policies that they had in place, yet still chose to put profits over people. At the end of this case, you will have all of the evidence, and you will know that it is because of UP's refusal to put people before profits. That is why we are in this courtroom today. And that is why Ali is dead. And that is why Mrs. Lee has no husband left. Mrs. Lee has lost the economic security that she was supposed to have from the laundromat and from the hard work that her and her husband would put in over 35 years. Even if they had not expanded their business, they would have made $1 million over the next 35 years. But the economic losses do not stop just there. Mrs. Lee lost a partner. She lost her best friend. She lost the person that she was supposed to make a family with, to live through the downs and ups of life with. That is gone forever, and she will never get that back. And because of this, you will find that the adequate damages that should be awarded against UP are $10 million.
Thank you. Mr. Phillips and Mr. Osborne, are you opening now, or are you?
Mr. Osborne is opening.
Okay.
Yes, Your Honor.
Fine, thank you.
Good evening, members of the jury. My name is Dawson Osborne. I'm here alongside, excuse me, my co-counsel, Jim Phillips, and we represent the Union Pacific Railroad in this matter. We're also joined by Mr. Jim Evans, and he's the representative from Union Pacific. Come on, boys. We may as well finish it now. As long as we have commenced it, it has to be done anyhow. That's what the white miners said in mine number 6 after they'd killed the one Chinese miner by bludgeoning him to death 3 times by hitting him in the head with a pickaxe. Now, you heard from plaintiff's counsel that the mine bosses, they didn't come down. It took them 30 minutes to get down there. The mine bosses came as fast as they could to break up that fight. They came down as quickly as they could, and at that point, there was one Chinese miner dead, and insurrection was on the rise. Mr. Jim Evans, he did exactly what he had to do. He tried to get the miners to reason with him. The only way that more violence would occur is if they left the mines. So he did the only thing he knew, and he tried to convince the miners to stay in the mines and to go back to work. But the miners refused. It was too late now. They'd already killed one Chinese miner. So they left. They headed to the saloon, and they closed the saloon down before noon. At that point, they went to their personal homes. They got their own personal weapons, and a rumor started circulating that Union Pacific was calling federal troops to put down this insurrection. So they figured they had to act now. They took their guns, 150 some strong, and they went to Chinatown. And as you heard, a number of tragedies happened that day. They killed, they burnt, they looted, and when it was all said and done, some 56 Chinese were dead. Now you'll hear from law enforcement in this case. Sheriff Young, the Green River Sheriff, and he took the special train over from Rock Springs, or from Green River, excuse me. And when he arrived, there was nothing he could do. The mob was so out of control that he couldn't even form a posse because the town was so scared of the members of that mob. He had to wait for federal troops to arrive. And you'll also hear from Governor Warren, who requested those federal troops. And once those federal troops arrived, Sheriff Young was able to make 16 arrests out of that mob of 150. They were charged with arson, robbery, murder, and assault. But the real travesty occurred there because the grand jury didn't even indict them on the charges, because the grand jury was made up of the same members of that mob that sympathized with what they did and the Chinese that they killed. Members of the jury, I want to remind you of the oath that the judge administered when we started this trial. And that oath was to consider the evidence, and I trust you'll keep an open mind, that you won't just hear the plaintiff's side of the story, that there's two sides to every story. And when you walk in this courtroom, you weren't required to leave common sense at the door. And I trust that you'll see the evidence in the light of common sense, and you'll see that the others in this case, the riotous, the racist mob that killed 56 Chinese, including the tragic death of Mr. Li, is responsible wholly for for Mr. Li's death. Thank you.
Thank you. Could we have the plaintiff's first witness?
The plaintiff would call Mr. Isaiah Whitehouse.
All right.
Mr. Whitehouse, is that your witness?
Yes.
Mr. Whitehouse, would you step up here in front of me, please? And raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in the matter now pending before this court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Please take the stand.
Mr. Whitehouse, you are an immigrant minor that works for UP in Rock Springs.
I am.
You are from England,
Yes.
and you want a seat in the territorial legislature,
I did.
so you are a delegate-elect from Sweetwater County.
Yes, I'm the delegate-elect from Sweetwater County.
This made you, by 1885, the leader of the Rock Springs mining community.
I'm the delegate from Sweetwater County.
But for all intents and purposes, you're the leader of Rock Springs mining community.
There's a lot of leaders in the community.
I'd like to start by talking to you a little bit about the working conditions within the mines. The working conditions in the mine were miserable.
Yes.
I'd like to show you some pictures. Are you familiar with these pictures?
Yes.
And would you say that they are an accurate reflection of the conditions within the mines?
The roof there is a little bit taller.
Okay. So the rooms in the mine were shorter than the miners for the most part.
Yes.
And you would have had to shovel while crouched down
Yes.
while you were working. And then you would have had to crawl back to the main road of the mine.
Yes.
You worked in mines that were extremely hot.
Yes.
And that you worked with headlamps that made the mines very, very hazy.
Yes.
And that just made conditions even worse to work in because you couldn't really see as you were crouched down.
The air was not good. No.
There were gas leaks. They were extremely common.
They happened, yes.
Yeah. I can take this off. That's easier. Sorry. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about pay and job loss, if that's okay. Pay got worse over time within the mines.
Yes. Yes, it did.
And UP cut wages but demanded more production.
Exactly.
You and the other miners have been complaining about working conditions for the UP since 1875.
When we could.
Those issues were mainly, were the many rounds of wage cuts throughout the mining community.
Amongst others, yes.
Other types of complaints were,
You mean about pay?
what other types of complaints did you have?
Well, the preference given to the Chinese. If we refused an entry, we were good as quitting. But the Chinese could refuse an entry and we would have to clear the rock for not enough pay. And then, after we cleared the entry, it'd be given over to the Chinese who refused it.
Another one of your grievances along with that was that white miners were losing jobs to Chinese miners.
Well, they weren't hiring white miners.
They weren't hiring white miners. And this is because Chinese miners work for less money.
Yes.
So you and the other miners had complained before to UP officials.
We'd complained, but if you took anything up above the superintendent, you'd be fired. And you couldn't join a union or you'd be fired.
So essentially, all of your complaints and grievances were never acknowledged by UP.
No, that's why I ran as Sweetwater representative.
And this caused further resentment for the miners that you are colleagues with.
Yes.
Were white miners assigned to more dangerous rooms?
We got all the worst, rockiest roads, yes.
I'd like to talk a little bit about white and Chinese miner relations with you. White miners were also fed up with UP's unequal treatment. We've talked about that. UP didn't treat miners reasonably because Chinese would work in horrible conditions for less money, correct?
Some would say that.
So white miners resented the Chinese miners, and UP knew it.
Yeah.
UP knew there was resentment of the Chinese miners.
Well, we've been complaining to them about selling rooms and all the other things they were doing.
So UP didn't care. They knew, but they just didn't care.
I don't know if they cared, I just know what they did.
Okay, I'd like to move on to the date of the incident, September 2nd, 1885. You arrived at work,
Yeah.
and there was a fight over what room you were supposed to be in.
I suppose you might put it that way. I went to the room that I was in.
But there was a fight about which room you were supposed to be in, and then that fight escalated quickly and became violent.
Yeah, so the day before, on September 1st, I'd gone down to the mine, and pit boss Bookman told me that I could have the rooms past the Chinese. There were 4 Chinese in 2 rooms. I took the next room, and I drilled in and set charges. When I came down on the 2nd, those charges were blown, and Chinese were working in my room.
So when this fight started, there was a lot of violence.
Well, not at first, no. I went
But you were
into-
struck in the stomach with a pick.
It was.
And the pick was taken away from the man who struck you in the stomach with it.
I saw that, yeah.
But other white miners were beating Chinese miners.
Well, it was a pretty general fight. After he struck me, my partner had to come help me. And then more Chinese came, and then more white miners came.
Well, eventually, one of the Chinese miners was hit in the head with a shovel by a white miner.
Yeah, that happened too.
And after half an hour is when the pit bosses, the UP management, arrived on scene.
If you say so, I wasn't checking my watch.
So when UP arrived on scene, there were many injured miners from the fight, and there was also a dead miner.
He may have been at that time.
And when he saw that there was a dead miner, UP management asked you, of all people, to try to get the mob that had been in the fight to go back to work.
Well, he asked us all to go back to work. He didn't talk to me until the rest had left.
Right, but he asked you to try to convince the mob to reason and come back to work, to chase after them after they had left.
Yeah, Evans did that.
And you chased after the mob,
I did.
and you tried to convince them,
I did.
but to no avail.
Nobody wanted to come back, no.
So there was a dead man lying on the ground, and all the UP manager wanted was for the entire group to get back to work.
Well, I sure didn't want what was going on, I don't think.
I want to move on to the killing of Ali. Towards the end of the riot, you saw a crowd running to the laundromat,
Yeah, after dinner, yeah.
and you heard shots go off.
Yes, there were shots.
That shot seemed to come from inside the laundry.
There were shots.
But you said that that shot seemed to come from inside the laundry.
It was there, so yeah.
That's a yes.
I reckon it was close enough, yeah.
I need to refresh your memory about what you said?
Okay, is that in my?
Yes.
So yeah,
So there were shots that were coming, that were being pointed towards the laundry.
my recollection is from the laundry, yeah.
Excellent, thank you. You heard shouting from inside the laundry,
A lot, yeah.
and then one final shot rang out.
Yes.
You then looked into the laundry through a window,
A bit later, yeah.
and when you did that, you saw Ali,
I saw Mr. Ali, yeah.
Mr. Ali. And in what state was Mr. Ali?
Well, he was lying on the floor face down. The back of his head was blown over.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Whitehouse.
Mr. Whitehouse, you mentioned a general fight. Would you consider a general fight one where a miner is hit in the head 3 times with a pickaxe and another miner is hit in the head repeatedly with a shovel?
I'm sorry?
You mentioned that it was a general fight down in mine number 6 that day.
Yes.
Would you consider it to be a general fight where a miner is hit in the head 3 times with a pickaxe and killing him?
Well, it's not the first fight I've seen where someone's been hit with a tool.
Is it the first fight that you've seen where someone's been killed by a pickaxe? Pickaxe, excuse me?
Yes.
Let's talk about what happened after the mine bosses came down and broke up the fight. Jim Evans tried to reason with you in the matter and tried to get you to keep the miners there to keep working.
He asked me to call them back when they'd gone up the main road, yeah.
And in fact, you heard one of the miners say, "Come on, boys, we might as well finish it now. As long as we have commenced, it must be done anyhow."
Yes, I heard that.
And so Evans actually told you, the miners, that you couldn't go back up out of the mine in the mine cars.
Yeah, he said we couldn't have the pick cars.
And so the miners, the white miners involved in the fight actually walked up out of the mines because they wanted to leave the mines.
Yes.
And so during the riot, you were involved in the riot.
Well, the whole town was pretty stirred up.
But you were a prominent member of the riot. You were actually arrested for your role in the riot.
I was arrested because I was there at the fight.
Did you ever kill anyone during the riot?
No, I did not.
Your Honor, a moment, please. Mr. Whitehouse, do you agree with the actions that the white miners took that day?
Well, something had to be done, but I don't think that was it.
No further questions, Your Honor.
One moment, Your Honor. Mr. Whitehouse, just briefly, you knew that UP knew of the sentiment towards Chinese miners for years.
Yeah, ever since they came in as strike breakers.
And on that day, you were going into work with Chinese miners, and tensions were high.
Yeah, but the mine is often mixed.
Right, but tensions were high. They had been very escalated for a while between white miners and Chinese workers.
But things weren't getting better.
Okay, so do you feel that UP was the one that were kind of causing these tensions to be higher by decreasing wages and making deplorable working conditions, and their continuous hiring of Chinese miners?
Well, I wish they'd talk to us a bit more about what was fair.
Okay, thank you. Your Honor, plaintiff would call Mrs. Chen Hui. Hello, Mrs. Kui. Could you please give us your full name?
My full name is Chen Hui.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I moved here with my husband. We moved first to California, and then about 10 years ago, we moved to Rock Springs in 1875.
Could you describe what the atmosphere in Rock Springs was like in 1875?
Well, when we moved there, it was because our countrymen were being hired in the mines. There was currently a strike by white miners, and our countrymen were filling those positions.
So, going off of that, I would like to talk a little about the living conditions in Rock Springs prior to the September 2nd, 1885 riot. How would you feel the mood towards the Chinese community was in Rock Springs?
There was a lot of violence against my people. We heard of violence in other cities as well, such as Cheyenne and Rawlins. It was not a fun place to be.
And why do you think that violence was occurring?
I assume because our countrymen were replacing people in the mines.
Were there any sort of public demonstrations of ill will towards the Chinese community?
There were posters put up all across town that said, "Get out or else," and "Get out immediately."
One moment. Do these posters look familiar to you?
Yes.
And would you say that they're the ones that are either the same or similar to the ones that were up around Rock Springs?
Yes, I've seen this poster before.
Your Honor, I'd like to move that these posters be offered into evidence.
No objection.
Perfect. Thank you. What did UP do or not do knowing of the tension between the white miners and Chinese miners?
I don't believe anything was done. Our countrymen still worked in the mines. There was still some strikes and violence against us by the white miners.
I'd like to talk a little bit about September 2nd now. Was there anything special about September 2nd?
There was a Chinese holiday, so many of the miners and their spouses took the day off and to celebrate.
And could you describe a little bit about what happened as the day progressed?
Well, it wasn't until later in the afternoon that I heard gunfire in the area where we lived. And when I looked out the window, there were miners everywhere pulling my countrymen out of their houses, robbing them, and shooting guns in the air.
Were there other things going on within Chinatown?
Yes, so after the gunfire ceased at one point, but then I saw the smoke from fires of houses being burnt to the ground and I saw the mob run towards Ali's laundromat, but I didn't see them again until they were at my door.
And what happened when they were at your door, the mob?
Well, they were shouting my husband's name and banging on the door, and so when I answered it, I informed them he had left, that he had taken the train to Evanston, and I was going to follow after them, or after him, and one of the miners told me that they were looking for my husband. They didn't want anything to do with me, so I could stay, but I didn't believe them.
Why do you think they wanted him and not you?
Well, my husband is one of the boss of the Chinese miners, so I assumed because of his position.
What did you do the day or days after September 2nd?
Well, as soon as the miners left from my front door, I gathered up all of the things I could carry and went to my neighbor's house. She took me in and I stayed there for a few days, and then I left Rock Springs.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Lee.
Mrs. Quee, you had heard stories of the Chinese being threatened in Cheyenne,
Yes,
and you had heard stories of the Chinese being beaten in Cheyenne.
yes,
You'd also heard stories of the Chinese being chased out of Rawlins
yes,
and chased out of Laramie.
yes,
And you had heard or seen the posters around Rock Springs, such as the poster right here that said the Chinese must go.
yes.
Did you ever hear of whites murdering the Chinese in Cheyenne?
No, I heard stories of them being beaten and run out of town. I don't remember murder.
Did you ever hear stories of the Chinese having their homes burned in Cheyenne,
No, I don't believe so.
in Rawlins,
No,
in Laramie?
no,
Did you ever hear of the Chinese having their homes looted in Laramie,
no,
in Cheyenne,
no,
in Rawlins?
no.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Briefly, Your Honor. Ms. Key, even though you had never heard of these things happening, the killings, the lootings, the shootings, the houses being burned down, does that necessarily mean, would you think that that could have still happened and it was not to your knowledge?
I believe so. Like I said before, there was a lot of violence against my people, and I doubt very seriously it was only in Rock Springs.
Thank you. Oh, one moment, Your Honor. Mrs. Key, did the UP ever do anything to make the conditions safer within Rock Springs?
Not that I know of, no.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Ming Lee. I don't know what that noise is. Mrs. Lee, can you please introduce yourself for the jury?
Hi, I'm Mrs. Lee. I am the wife of Ollie, the man who was murdered.
How are you doing tonight?
It's been tough.
None of us here got a chance to meet. Can you share with us how long back the two of you met?
We met about 10 years ago. It was love at first sight, really. We had planned to have a family, make a life for ourselves, and we thought that we could do that in Rock Springs.
How did you come to Wyoming?
We knew that it was a big mining town and that he could, get into mining and make a better life for himself than we could in China.
Tell us what kind of man was.
He was a good man. He worked harder than anybody in this town. He was always happy, always helpful, would help anyone out, and I don't recall anyone ever having any negative attitudes towards him.
What kind of worker was
He was a hard worker. He worked very hard when he was in the mining, and even harder when he was in charge of the laundromat.
What were you and Oz hopes and dreams when you made it to Wyoming back in, 1875?
When we came initially, we wanted to make a better life for ourselves, and he initially thought that mining was going to do that, but then once we got into laundry, we were pulling in a pretty steady income, and it looked like we were going to have a life for ourselves and be able to raise children in this country.
Now, were you one of those Chinese families that only worked with the Chinese community?
No, I was very involved with all of the community, no matter what race. He was very involved with the white miners, Chinese miners, like all of them.
What was that about? What made him like that?
He just wanted to help people, and once he saw a need, he wanted to fill that need. And when he saw that there wasn't a lot of laundry facilities, he wanted to go into that so that the miners could have clean clothes.
And was that a successful business?
It was a very successful business.
What kind of annual income were you and Odd generating out of his laundry work?
We were generating about $500 a month, so I'm not really sure what that is a year.
I'm sorry, is that $500 a week or $500 a month?
$500 a week, I'm sorry.
Okay. I've seen a figure, I know it's hard. I understand that you've shared with us before that the annual income was around $25,000 a year. Does that sound right?
Yes, that sounds right.
And had you talked with about, were you one of those families that was here for a couple of years and hoping to get back to China?
No. Once we started the laundry business, it was pretty dead set that we were going to stay here and we were going to build a family here because the income was good and the community was good, and this is where we wanted to raise a family.
And was, what, 30 at
Yes.
the time he was
He
killed?
was not very old at all. We were planning on having a child within the next 5 years.
Share with us, have you been able to stay?
No, I went back to China with Oz body, and I haven't been able to pick my life up since I lost him.
What do you miss about him the most?
His charismatic behavior, his ability to make me laugh, and just his partnership. Like I lost a partner for the rest of my life. I don't think I'll ever find that again.
You never got to say goodbye, but if you had a moment here tonight, if I were with us, what would you want to tell him?
Tell him that he made a good father, and he was such a hard worker, and he did so much good for this community, and I don't understand why he had to die. And I love him, and I miss him.
These are all my questions.
Mrs. Lee, I'll come over here so that we can face the jury together. Is that all right? It's true, is it not, that angry miners, a mob, killed your husband?
I don't know if that's true, honestly.
Do you have any idea of anyone else killing your husband?
I know it was angry miners, but I don't know if I could say it was a mob.
Oh, you did? Well, how would you define a mob? Is that not true? Is it not true that a mob is a group of people gathered together to go killing and terrorizing?
I guess you could say.
Okay, thank you. You also said that you came from China to build a better life. Your husband started here as a miner, did he not?
He did.
Was he happy with his wages?
He was, but he saw a better opportunity with laundry.
He could make more money here in the United States, certainly than he ever could have in China as a miner. Isn't that right?
I guess you could say that's true.
I appreciate your business.
Your Honor, may I ask that counsel give my client a little bit of space? This is a fairly personal matter, and I would hate for him to tower over her under these circumstances.
I would not wish to tower over her. I guess I am kind of tall. It is true, is it not, that in the building up of your cleaning business, laundry business, that, as you said, you worked with whites, you worked with Chinese miners? That's correct?
Yes, sir.
And you had a good relationship with both, isn't that true?
Yes, sir.
The laundry itself was not located in Chinatown, but outside of Chinatown, isn't that true?
Yes, sir.
It is also true that in building up your business, and I have to tell you, if I made as much as you did, my wife would tell me that I should quit practicing law and become a lawyer. But at any rate, with respect to that, you intentionally cultivated good relationships with white miners and with Chinese miners. Isn't that true?
Yes.
You had to have the miners. You couldn't have any laundry business. Isn't that true?
Yes.
You were dependent on Union Pacific for your money in your laundry because you did the work for Chinese and for white miners, right? It is also true, is it not, that in building up your business, you did a good job. You worked hard and you turned out a good product, right?
I don't know if you say that I did it. My husband, he was the front of all of this.
All right, but you two were working together. You kept the books. He was working there, right?
Yes, he was.
And he was very proud of his business, wasn't he?
Yes, he was a good man.
And you worked hard to be friendly with the white miners and the Chinese miners, right?
Yes, sir.
And as there were problems developing there in the community with the different miners, you felt, I suspect, that you didn't have anything to worry about because you had no dog in that fight and you were friends with the whites and the Chinese. Isn't that true?
I don't think that's correct to assume.
That isn't what maybe I'd better rephrase the question. You didn't leave Rock Springs when the trouble started, right?
Right.
And the reason you didn't leave Rock Springs when the trouble started was you had your business there, right?
Yes.
You were making a lot of money, right?
Yes.
And certainly you didn't believe your husband was going to be killed, right?
I don't think that's a safe assumption, honestly.
Did you think your husband was going to get killed that day?
He never took sides, but there was always a worry.
Well, did the white Chinese, or did the white miners ever attack you in the laundry before?
Not that I know of.
You wouldn't have known if they would have attacked you?
They didn't attack me
Okay,
personally.
did your husband ever say anything about being attacked?
He did not.
You certainly had the wherewithal to leave Rock Springs, right?
No, we did not.
Making $24,000 a year, you didn't have enough money to catch the train to leave town until the trouble blew over?
I think that's a far assumption to make.
That you didn't have you had the money, didn't you? You kept the books.
I did keep the books, but it wasn't that was all pure profit.
Well, I appreciate there might have been some other expenses, but certainly you had enough money for a train ticket, right?
I guess you could say that.
Okay, I guess I could, and so you could have left, right?
We could have if we wanted to uproot our family and like where we were in our state of home, but we had made a home in Rock Springs.
I understand that, but I repeat, certainly you would have left if you had any fear that your husband was going to be
Objection. Asked and
killed.
answered. Argumentative. Your Honor, what is the purpose of this inquiry?
I promise that I will make it subject to connection, Your Honor. Yes. But I will connect it in my closing argument and as we talk to other witnesses, Your Honor. I don't want to go much further. So once again, you did not believe, and your husband did not believe, that he would have been killed that day by you staying, right?
If there was an imminent fear that he would have died that day, I would have done anything in my power to have changed it.
I appreciate that, thank you. You wrote a letter to, and can we put that on the screen, please? I'll have you look at this real quickly. You wrote a letter to the governor. Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Lee, the Union Pacific doesn't appear to be all that apologetic. Have they ever said they're sorry for killing your husband once?
No, they haven't.
What is the last thing that the UP ever communicated to you, ever, before this, whatever this was, in front of this jury tonight?
They said that the harassment and the flyers would stop, but it didn't. And my husband, he wasn't on a side. He was the owner of a laundromat. He wasn't even part of this.
Did they send you any kind of written communication after he died?
Not that I know of.
What about a bill?
For his body, you mean?
Yeah, the last thing they ever told you. Those are all the questions I have. Actually, Your Honor, with that, the plaintiff rests.
Swear that the testimony you're about to give tonight and please take a stand.
Tell the jury your name.
James Evans,
Where do you live?
live in Rock Springs.
What do you do?
I am the superintendent of the mine.
Were you the superintendent of the mine back on September 2nd of 1885?
Yes, sir, I was.
What does the superintendent do?
Well, it's a little bit easier of a job than it is to mine. But a little bit of paper pushing, a little bit of corralling the miners. I mean, it's hey, just make sure the mine functions how it's supposed to. Make sure we get the coal out that we need for UP.
Did a problem develop on September 2nd of 1885?
Yes, sir. A problem did develop.
Where?
At the number 6 mine.
What was the problem?
Well, there was a dispute over who was supposed to be mining a particular room within the number 6 mine. A fight broke out, and it was quelled. At least that fight was quelled.
What did you do to quell it as a mine superintendent?
Well, the other pit bosses in the area gave me notice that there was a fight that had broken out, and so we rushed as fast as we could get there. I mean, one of the most important things for the mine to do is to produce enough coal to run the trains, and it's just really important that we get those quotas.
Were you concerned about the health and safety of the miners, both white and Chinese?
Oh, absolutely. The like I said, efficiency of the production is the most important thing, and the health and safety of every miner that digs in the number 6 mine or any of the mines is of the utmost importance to the company.
And was that something that was taught you by company officials?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's any specific policy I can speak to, but truly, the company does care.
You've been here in the courtroom and heard testimony about the rioting that took place that day. What did you observe?
From the testimony?
Yes. What did you observe?
Oh, what did I observe? We got there as soon as we can. I mean, for the initial fight in the mine, and I guess were you talking about the fight in the mine itself or later?
How about later?
Later, I saw all the miners leaving, walking out, and we saw. It's just groups of people, a mob forming, and they eventually came to my door.
Had anything been brought to your attention that prepared you for the riot that took place that day?
I mean, I really, when the people came to my door and told me to get out of town, I don't know if that's really preparation for what happened that day, but I mean, that's what I knew.
Let me phrase this just a little differently real quickly. From what had happened in other areas, or what was happening in the mine there, did you have any belief that the riot that ensued was going to take place?
Oh, no, I had no idea.
And in your job, did you do anything that you thought was out of the ordinary because you anticipated this riot?
No, like I said, we had no idea this was going to happen.
Were things financially tough for Union Pacific?
Oh, yes, sir. The economic downturn that had just happened, we were getting crunched to make sure that we were pumping out enough coal for the railroad to still function, and yeah.
Your witness?
Mr. Evans, did you just testify to this jury that the Union Pacific Railroad was going through tough times? Did I hear that right?
Yes, sir, there was an economic
Is this
downturn.
the same Union Pacific Railroad that in 1874, I'm sorry, I must have, is that a difficult question? The Union Pacific Railroad was going through tough times, is that the testimony, sir?
I believe all of us across the country were. The railroad was no exception.
This is the same Union Pacific Railroad whose president, a decade ago, himself profited $20 million. This Union Pacific Railroad?
A decade ago, perhaps, but that wasn't the financial situation in the time that this was happening.
This is the same Union Pacific Railroad that cut miners' pay repeatedly, year in and year out, while pulling more coal out of the ground of Rock Springs. That Union Pacific?
Was that a question?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm talking about the right company, because my understanding is the Union Pacific Railroad is one of the wealthiest companies in the entire world. Is it true that the Union Pacific coal operation in Rock Springs is the most profitable coal mine anywhere in the country?
Mr. Bone, objection. No foundation on this. This is superintendent of mine.
Your Honor, he was the designated Union Pacific representative here at trial, and the only person who was designated. Sir,
I'm still not sure what the question is.
the question is, you're aware, aren't you, that the Union Pacific coal mines in Rock Springs are the most profitable of all of its mines in the country?
Thanks to the employees that support us, absolutely.
I wanted to make sure that you weren't telling the ladies and gentlemen of the jury here tonight that the Union Pacific was unable to provide safe and humane work conditions for all of its workers.
I suppose what I had stated was that the railroad was having a tough time financially, just coping with the economic downturn that had just happened.
Well, let's talk about what the railroad did and didn't do. Back in 1875, in response to strikes, where American miners asked for basic living wages and safe work conditions, the UP brought in Chinese miners instead of taking care of its people. Sure?
Sir, I'm not sure that they were American. The Union Pacific Railroad employs a plethora of immigrants.
Sir, my question is, in response to the strikes by its own workers, the UP refused to make conditions better, or to pay them fair wages. Instead, the UP brought in immigrant Chinese miners to work for less money under worse conditions. Isn't that true? Starting back in 1875.
Not sure that they were worse conditions. We certainly brought in anyone that we could find that could operate the mines, as the mines were essential to, mines were essential to the operation of the company.
And after years of bringing in hundreds of Chinese miners, the Union Pacific continued to cut wages and told its own employees, the white miners, that if they tried to unionize or complained about conditions, that they would be fired and replaced by Chinese miners. Right?
I'm not sure that
Well,
that was ever told.
You were there in those circumstances, and you're aware that in Rock Springs, miners were forced to sign an agreement that they would unionize. Isn't that true?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, sir. I'm so sorry.
I'd like to show you exactly what was going on. The Chinese Exclusion Act was passed by the United States Congress in 1882. You're aware of that, right?
Not the date, but the act.
And it said that Chinese workers should not be allowed into the country or employed. You're aware of that general law, right?
You know, I always thought it was just importation.
Well, you're not going to dispute, sir, are you, that it was illegal to hire and employ Chinese immigrant miners by 1883 and 4?
Well, I'm,
States the law, and it certainly beyond this witness, really goes beyond the scope of cross.
Well, it's important for the Union Pacific as an employer to be aware of the law.
Well, the thing is, to say whether he knows about this, I mean, and one thing when it's sometimes struggling with this, if they don't know, it's hard for them to say they don't know. If you know, you can answer the question. If you don't know, you should say you don't know. And if you don't understand the question, you can ask them the question.
you know, my understanding was that the act was just banning the importation, and I mean, I'm not an attorney, so I guess I don't really know how to read the law, but my understanding from at least my bosses was that it was just importation, and that the individuals that were here we could employ within the mines.
I'd like to show you exhibit number 5, which has been previously stipulated and admitted. This is a Union Pacific letter, and you can see here, this was written from the president of the Union Pacific to the general superintendent, stating that radical measures are necessary. In February of 1885, no more white miners are to be hired in Rock Springs, and all vacancies along the line shall be filled as far as possible by Mormons. Now, we all know that Chinese continued to be employed and brought in even into 1885, right?
I believe so.
And because the UP continued to bring in illegal Chinese workers, even years after the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Union Pacific also understood that created tension in the mine. And here, the president of the UP writes, I anticipate there will be further violence in response to these new measures. The UP knew exactly what was coming when it hired those Chinese miners, didn't it?
I mean, I think this letter you're showing me at least shows that we were trying to cope and understand a little bit more and make sure that this type of event, even though we had no idea the magnitude that it would reach, that we were trying to protect against more strife within the community.
Sir, I anticipate that there will be further violence from the president of the Union Pacific. Let me show you Exhibit 6, please. been previously stipulated in the minute. Another letter from the President of the Union Pacific in 1885. This simmering discontent is worse than open rupture. Things were getting bad, and everyone knew it.
The growing tensions within the community were noticeable.
And the growing tensions were the result of the Union Pacific refusing to help the white miners, and instead bringing in Chinese miners, creating racial tension inside these hot, miserable, smoky mines, and it was just a matter of time, wasn't it?
Well, this was all brought on partly by the unions. It wasn't anything, you can't possibly expect a company to bow down to the wishes of a union.
It was a matter of time, and it wasn't just that it was a wage issue. You knew that violence was coming. Everyone in the streets knew it. Everyone saw those posters. We've seen them all before. Get out. It was just a matter of time. Let me show you Exhibit 7. Mr. Evans, thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Evans, it's true, is it not, that those labor unions you described actually wrote specifically? Those are all the questions I have for you.
This did not happen in a real trial.
Are Chinese Americans?
I suppose, I don't know, that would kind of depend on other
But
circumstances.
just because they're Chinese, we don't say they're not Americans. Is that correct?
Yeah, we employed everybody.
We talked about the violence that was so obvious. We saw the letters with Union Pacific. You were concerned about violence in the mine, were you?
No, absolutely.
But you'd never seen anything like what happened on September 2nd, right?
I'm not sure the country had seen anything like that.
That's all, thank you.
Your Honor, Union Pacific calls Sheriff Joseph Young to stand.
Raise your right hand. You solemnly swear that the testimony about the present matter now pending before this court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Please take a stand.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Yes, I am Sheriff Joseph Young of Green River, Wyoming Territory.
And Mr. Young, what do you do for a living?
I am the sheriff in the town, although I arrived in Rock Springs in 1870 and for a time owned a butcher shop in that town. And I also ran a ranch with a couple of guys.
And so you're the sheriff in Green River. What's your connection to Rock Springs?
Well, I am the sheriff for Sweetwater County. That is, the seat of that is in Green River, and therefore I am the closest sheriff to the town of Rock Springs.
And let's jump directly to the date of the tragedy that this case revolves around, September 2nd, 1885. What happened that day?
Well, to begin with, I should inform you that Rock Springs does not have a potable source of water. So it gets its water from the Green River, which is about 12 miles away. It gets its water from a special train that arrives there in the town once a day. And on the day in question, the train arrived on time, except that the conductor handed me a note. And this note said that there was trouble in the town of Rock Springs. I should note that the note came from an official of the Union Pacific, and it requested that I come to the town as soon as possible to deal with the situation.
And so, did you go to the town as soon as possible?
Yes, I did. I took a special train to the town, and I arrived there just about the time that the rioters were breaking up for dinner.
And so what did you do next?
Well, I tried to form a posse, but I couldn't get anybody to help me in my cause. I did manage to secure the Union Pacific buildings, but other than that, nobody would help me.
And you mentioned no one would help you. Why was that?
I suspect that they were probably afraid. They were either afraid of reprisal from their neighbors, or they actually sympathized with the rioters themselves.
And so at that moment in time, was there anything that you could have done to prevent the destruction that happened in Rock Springs and Chinatown that day?
No, I don't think there was. I did everything that I could. Unfortunately, I myself had to get out of sight that day for fear of what the rioters would do if they saw me in the town.
And so you get out of Rock Springs. What happens next?
Well, I didn't leave Rock Springs right away. The first thing I did was get behind doors, and from there I was able to witness a second attack on the Chinatown. There was looting, there was burning of buildings, and after that I went back to Green River.
And so, what were your next steps in quelling what was going on in Rock Springs?
Well, for the next couple of days, there was virtually no business in Rock Springs. The trains didn't stop into town, the mines were closed, the buildings, the shops were all closed. Everybody was scared. So my responsibility was to attempt to bring a sense of order and security to the town. Governor Warren and the Union Pacific company officials were able to wire the President of the United States and ask for a couple of regiments of the federal troops to arrive in town. They eventually did. They arrived both in Rock Springs and in Evanston, and with their help, I was able to finally make a few arrests.
How many arrests did you end up making?
I made 16 arrests. Most of them were young men, some of them were married, and among the arrests were Mr. Whitehouse and Mr. Jenkins.
And so after you arrested these men, what did you do next?
Well, with the help of the federal troops, I was able to bring a little bit of order, enough that I could then deputize a handful of men to help to keep a sense of safety in the town.
And let's go back to the men that were arrested. What happened with them after you arrested them?
Well, I took them to the jail in Green River and had them stay there overnight. While they were there, they were singing and joking and carrying on. The next morning, they were brought before a judge who formally charged them with the crimes of arson and murder and robbery.
And that seems like strange behavior for people who were just arrested and find themselves in jail. Why were they acting like that?
Well, I suspect that they felt they would probably get off.
And so what happened after they were charged with the arson, the murder, and the robbery?
They were brought before a grand jury, and the grand jury returned a no bill on all charges.
And what does a no bill mean?
It means that they were not going to be tried for criminal offenses.
And how did you feel about that?
I thought it was a burlesque farce.
And let's jump to the final point. Did you think that the white miners were justified in the actions that they took on September 2nd, 1885 in Rock Springs?
No, I do not.
Nothing further on direct, Your Honor.
All right.
Sheriff Young, you did because you felt that no one was helping you during the riot, from a posse.
That's correct.
You felt that there were no UP men, there was no one from UP, no management present to help you form the posse.
That is correct.
There was no UP management willing to help you mitigate this riot.
No one would help me put down the riot. That is correct.
In fact, you didn't really see anyone from UP trying to mitigate this riot.
No, ma'am.
I want to talk a little bit about what happened immediately after the incident. After the incident, a group of white rioters spoke to Governor Warren.
As far as I know, yes, ma'am. I was not privy to that.
Do you need to be refreshed?
If you please, I'm not privy to that information.
This is from your official statement to Sweetwater County. May he disclose this highlighted section of documents?
Ah, yes, I remember this now. A group of rioters did meet with Governor Warren and warned him that no Chinese should live in Rock Springs ever again. No one would be arrested for the events that occurred, and that destruction would follow those who differed from this.
Thank you. So after they spoke to Governor Warren, and after this incident had kind of calmed down days later, UP attempted to reopen the mines.
That's correct.
And this was after troops were sent in,
Yes,
after you had made arrests,
yes,
after all of those indictments against the arrested rioters were dropped.
yes.
Their main goal was to reopen their mines as fast as they could.
That is correct.
After 28 people had died.
That is correct.
And they did open those mines,
Yes,
and they opened them on September 21st of 1885, reopened them.
that is correct.
They reopened them then when there were still tangible struggles going on with the labor unions at the time.
Yes,
And those tangible struggles you knew were, and that discontent was still obvious until about November of that year.
that discontent was still there until about November 21st. But I do want to say that there was never again a case of violence like that happened on September 2nd.
Right, but you would say that UP's main concern was getting the mines back open
Absolutely.
in order to make profits?
Yes.
Yes, Your Honor. Sheriff Young, Plaintiff's counsel mentioned there weren't a lot of UP officials helping you out form a posse on September 2nd. Do you believe that Union Pacific should be responsible for law enforcement in Rock Springs?
Well, the only thing I can say in response to that was it was a call from the Union Pacific that brought me there in the first place.
Do you think that Union Pacific should have the responsibility of providing law enforcement just in the Rock Springs community, though?
I don't think so. That's the job of the sheriff.
Should it be Union Pacific's responsibility to hire quote-unquote mercenaries to enforce the law in situations like this?
No, no, sir.
Did you ever foresee a situation where there would be a violent riot like this occurring in Rock Springs?
Not at the time. I most certainly did not.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, thank you for your testimony. I think we have one last witness, correct?
We do, Your Honor.
Who might that be?
We call the Honorable Governor of the Territory of Wyoming, Francis C. Warren.
Who's that? Raise your right hand. Solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give is the matter now pending before this court will be approved of all the facts and documents of the matter. Please state your name.
Good evening, Governor.
Good evening.
Would you state your full name for the record, please?
I'm Francis E. Warren, Territorial Governor of Wyoming.
Governor Warren, when did you first become aware of the rioting in Rock Springs on September 2nd?
About 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I received a telegram from Union Pacific officials in Rock Springs.
And what did you do in response to that telegram?
I immediately contacted the War Department and asked for troops to pacify Rock Springs.
Did you think of sending any territorial troops?
We didn't have any territorial troops.
Have you ever had any territorial troops?
No, sir, we relied on the United States military to keep order.
Did you anticipate that the Union Pacific would hire troops or mercenaries to keep the order?
I would prefer that they didn't.
Why?
Back east, where they've had hired mercenaries, they intensified the labor strife that they had back east.
Is it important to you to have law-abiding citizens in Wyoming?
Of course,
Why?
to keep the peace and to keep commerce flowing.
What did you then do in response to the conditions in Rock Springs?
I boarded a train of Union Pacific officials about midnight in Cheyenne, and it was a fast train, and we got to Rock Springs right around daybreak.
What did you observe when you got here?
Oh, it's terrible. You could still see the buildings burning. You would walk through the streets and you would see these poor charred bodies twisted and turned in the streets. It was just plain ugly.
Did you, in your mind as governor of the territory, ever believe that there would be this kind of violence on the streets of Rock Springs?
No, sir.
This particular violence came as a total shock to your senses, as I understand it.
It was totally just mythical.
Were you ever confronted by the striking miners, if you want to call them that, or the mob, after you arrived in Rock Springs?
Yes, they opened the doors, and a group came to the train and said that there would be no more Chinese in the city of Rock Springs, and that no one that took place in the riot would ever be prosecuted.
Were you aware if anyone was ever prosecuted?
No, there wasn't. They had a grand jury, and that was the most tragic thing in injustice I think I've ever seen in the state or the territory of Wyoming.
Why?
Well, they put the people that were in the mob on the grand jury, and of course they were not going to ever indict their friends and their fellow mobsters.
How did you feel about that mobster approaching you and saying that there will be no prosecutions and the other things he told you? How did you feel about that?
Objection. We all have feelings, but his feelings here have no bearing on this trial.
Your Honor, I suggest that they are very relevant because he, as the governor, has to deal with the problem. Were you aware of the financial condition of the Union Pacific Railroad at this time?
Yes, sir.
Tell us about it.
The Union Pacific has been going through a national financial crisis. They were looking for ways to keep the Union Pacific going.
Were you, as governor, ever aware of anything that they did illegal in hiring Chinese miners?
No, sir. It was perfectly legal at that time.
Do you think the Chinese, as a people, deserve different citizen status in the United States?
No, sir.
They're Americans.
Yes, sir.
Are you critical of anything that the Union Pacific did as far as this particular action by the mobs in killing people and destroying property?
No, sir.
Why?
It's not the job of the Union Pacific to keep the peace in any town, including Rock Springs.
Do you believe? Let me ask her. Do you hope that Wyoming becomes a state someday?
Oh, I hope so.
Is this kind of conduct? Thank you.
Hello.
Can you just tell this fine group of Wyoming citizens that a riot occurring 10 years after the UP started to import Chinese labor and refused to
to allow the people in Rock Springs to unionize was a mythical, unexpected act.
I don't think that it was a mythical act. But what happened was the commerce of the United States depends on finding good, dependable labor.
Governor, you testified, did I mishear you, that you said that it was a mythical act?
Mythical act.
You're
Sir?
aware, sir, aren't you, that we have all seen already in this courtroom that the UP itself was expecting violence to follow because it refused to meet the miners' demands for fair wages and fair working conditions. The UP itself wrote violence would be coming.
I did not see that at all.
And you are here to tell us that it's a mythical act, that there was a riot. Governor, let's talk a little bit about whose team you're on. I appreciate your service to this state. You're also have quite a relationship with the UP, Governor.
In what way?
Well, for example, you have a financial incentive in coming to rescue the UP here because you have an interest in the profitability of the corporation.
Your Honor, objection. This is totally immaterial, irrelevant, and incompetent, and impugns the reputation of this governor who has been so kind as to come and provide his testimony before this court today. This is totally inappropriate questioning by Mr. Logan, and he knows it. Objection.
Your Honor, we all need to know, even the governor's bias, is sitting in his seat today, as to what he is testifying to.
Move on to something else.
Governor, let's talk about what you do.
Yes, sir.
Even before this mythical riot that we've heard about now, you knew yourself, and you were concerned that violation of the Chinese Exclusion Act by bringing Chinese laborers into Wyoming and putting them into the mine was a danger to this state, to this territory. That's right.
First of all, Councilman, there was no mythical riot in Rock Springs. That happened.
I'm sorry, I was using your language. We can move on, and we don't need to. Governor, the document that I have behind you here is Exhibit 8. It's been previously stipulated to and admitted. You wrote to the Secretary of the Interior of the United States, looking to Wyoming interests, which recommended that the Restriction Act applying to Chinese immigration, the Chinese Exclusion Act, correct, sir?
Yes, sir.
Should be rigidly enforced. And that's because you were concerned that some employers, like the UP, were disregarding and violating the act by immigrating, importing, and putting to work Chinese laborers in the mines, creating tension and potential danger for our territory.
Objection, Your Honor. The question is compound. It also assumes facts not in evidence and lacks foundation.
What should I
So many choices, Your Honor.
Your Honor, I'll ask
ask such an improper question. You have multiple choices.
You're really short on time.
Governor, you knew that the UP was violating the Chinese Exclusion Act, and you were concerned prior to September 2nd, 1885. True?
No. The way that I understood it is that there could be no new Chinese immigrated to the United States. I also know that there was a large body of Chinese in the United States that were shifting around looking for new jobs. And since the closing of the Central Pacific Railroad and the construction thereof, they were finding new areas to go to, which included the city of Rock Springs and mining in the number 6 mine.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Just real quickly, Governor, as we talk about violence from striking miners, did you believe that that kind of violence described would escalate to the scene that you saw in Rock Springs?
No, sir.
Had you ever seen anything like that before in your life?
No, sir.
Governor, thank you so much for testifying and for your great work for the territory of Wyoming. I believe if you keep up the good work, it may well be that a military base in Cheyenne may be named after you someday.
Thank you, Council. I'm looking forward to that.
Restaurant.
No, if you have no rebuttal. Okay, no, and the next order of business then is for me to read the instructions to the jury, and the jurors are each getting a copy of those instructions. And at the conclusion of the instructions, then the attorneys will argue their case to the jury. All right. Members of the jury, I now have to read you the instructions that you must follow in rendering your decision in this case. Instruction number 1, members of the jury, the evidence and arguments in this case have been completed. I will now instruct you as to the law. The law that applies to this case is stated in these instructions, and it is your duty to follow all of them. It is your duty to determine the facts and determine them only from the evidence in this case. You are to apply the law to the facts and in this way decide the case. Neither sympathy nor prejudice should influence you. You are the sole judges of the believability of the witnesses and of the weight to be given to the testimony of each of them. You should consider all the evidence in the light of your own observations and experience in life. Each of you must decide the case for yourself, but you should do so only after you have considered all the evidence, discussed it fully with the other jurors, and listened to the views of your fellow jurors. Your verdict must be agreed to by each juror. Although the verdict must be unanimous, the verdict should be signed by the presiding juror alone. Instruction number 2, the plaintiff, Ming Lee, brings this action in her capacity as wrongful death representative of Ali. She brings this action as the person claiming the right to recover damages under Wyoming law for the wrongful death of Ali. Instruction number 3, the plaintiff has the burden of proving that the defendant, Union Pacific, was negligent and that this negligence caused the death of Ali. When a party has a burden of proof, that means you must be persuaded, considering all the evidence in the case, that the issue on which the party has the burden of proof is probably more true than not true. If you determine that Ali has established that Union Pacific was negligent and that this negligence caused Ali's death, you should assign a percentage of comparative fault to Union Pacific on the verdict form. Instruction number 4, when the word negligence is used in these instructions, it means the failure to use ordinary care. Ordinary care means the degree of care which should reasonably be expected of the ordinary, careful person under the same or similar circumstances. The law does not say how such an ordinary, careful person would act. That is for you to decide. Violation of a statute is evidence of negligence. If you determine that a party violated a statute on the occasion in question and that the violation played a substantial part in bringing about the injury or damage, then you may consider that fact together with all the other facts and circumstances in evidence in determining whether or not the party was at fault at the time of the occurrence. The fact that damages or injury occurred is not in itself sufficient to show that any party was at fault. Instruction number 5, an injury or damage is caused by an act or a failure to act whenever it appears from the evidence that the act or failure to act played a substantial part in bringing about the injury or damage. If more than one act or failure to act contributed to the claimed injury, then each act or failure to act may have been a cause of the injury within the meaning of these instructions. A cause does not have to be the only cause or the last or nearest cause. It is sufficient if the act or failure to act joins in a natural and probable way with some other act or failure to act to cause some or all of the claimed injury. Instruction number 6, the negligence, if any, of a party is not a cause unless injury to a person in Ali's situation was a reasonably foreseeable consequence of that negligence. The exact or precise injury need not have been foreseeable, but a party may be found to be a cause of harm if a reasonably careful person under similar or the same circumstances as the party would have anticipated that injury to a person in Ali's situation might result from the party's conduct. Instruction number 7, defendant Union Pacific contends that Ali caused his own death through negligence. Defendant Union Pacific has the burden of proof on the
Instruction number 8, defendant Union Pacific also contends that others caused the death of Ali by committing a battery against him. One commits a battery by one acting intentionally to cause a harmful or offensive contact with another person, such as shooting that person, and two, a harmful or offensive contact with that person, such as being shot directly or indirectly. Defendant Union Pacific has the burden of proof to establish that the others committed the battery against Ali. If you determine that the Union Pacific, I don't think that thing's working. If you determine that the Union Pacific has established that others caused a battery against Ali, you should assign a percentage of comparative fault to others on the verdict form. Instruction number 9, your verdict must be determined on the basis of comparative fault of the parties. A party is at fault when that party is negligent or commits a battery, and that negligence or battery is the cause of Ali's death. More than one party can be the cause of a person's death. Your findings as to fault will affect the plaintiff's recovery. The plaintiff's recovery is reduced by the percentages, if any, of fault that you attribute to Ali and those other than Union Pacific. If you find that Ali's fault exceeds 50%, the plaintiff will not be entitled to recover any damages. If you find that others, not Union Pacific, are at fault, the plaintiff's recovery will be reduced by the percentage that you assign to these others. Union Pacific's liability for damages is limited to the percentage of fault, if any, that you assign to Union Pacific. If you find that Ali is 50% at fault or less, then you should fill in the total amount of damages, if any, on the verdict form. Do not reduce your determination of total damages by any percentage of fault you have attributed to Ali. The court will reduce any amount of damages by the percentage of fault, if any, you attribute to Ali and those other than Union Pacific. Instruction number 10. If you find that Ali is 50% at fault or less, you shall determine without regard to the percentages you have allocated the amount of damages, if any, sustained by Ming Lee, taking into account the nature, extent, and duration of each of the following. 1, the amount she has failed or will fail to receive from the decedent's earnings, as explained in the following instruction. 2, the loss of probable future companionship, society, and comfort.
which shall not include any damages for her anguish, and 3, any other monetary loss sustained and proved by her resulting from the death of the decedent, including funeral expenses and other proper charges. There is no formula that the court can give you for the determination of damages for loss of probable future companionship, society, and comfort. However, this amount may not include damages for mental anguish and/or suffering. It is not necessary that any witness shall have expressed any opinion as to the dollar amount of damages. Your award, if any, rests within your sound discretion, and it is up to you to determine, taking into consideration all the evidence in the case and from your knowledge, observation, and experience in life, your award, if any, should be for what damages are reasonable and just. That concludes the jury instructions that I have, although there's one reference that there is a following instruction, but I don't have another instruction, so we're good.
Cut it out to save some time.
Okay, so that concludes the instructions that the jury must follow. At this time, we can move into closing arguments, beginning with counsel for plaintiff. Counsel.
A territory, state, nation cannot survive without the rule of law. But the Union Pacific, for years now, has acted, and in some cases, actually been above the law. Ali is dead, along with 27 others, from a riot that stemmed from violence that the UP created and expected. Should we care? Does it matter? What kind of a state are we going to be? What kind of place do we want our children to grow up in? Does the law matter? We're here because the Union Pacific disregarded federal law that told them specifically, you may not import Chinese labor and put them to work in the Rock Spring mines or anywhere else. They continued to do it for years. We're here because the laws of Wyoming require them to be reasonable as a corporation. And when a fight broke out, I mean, really, the fight broke out years ago when they brought in this Chinese labor because they refused to make things decent for the miners that were already here. But that day when the fight broke out, the UP had already disregarded the safety of its miners for years. And then that day, down in that mine, instead of taking reasonable steps to keep people safe, there was a man dead in the mine already, and 3 badly beaten Chinese miners, and a gang, a mob, erupting out of the mine. And what does UP do? Tell the man that had been in the fight to go see if they could get people back to work. Is that reasonable? You'll see the instructions and the judge has read to you that if you are not ordinarily reasonably prudent, if you're not reasonably safe, that's negligence. And when you disregard people's safety and a mob runs out into the streets and grows, you know exactly what's going to happen. And can we see Exhibit 5, please? The UP knew exactly what was going to happen, not just deep down inside, they openly knew exactly what was going to happen. They said to each other in writing,
If we keep this up, violence will ensue.
they knew exactly what they were creating in those minds. And this is what we get. Dead miners. You'll be instructed on cause, foreseeable consequence. Did the actions of the Union Pacific play a substantial part in bringing about all these deaths? How long ago had the UP lit the fuse on this bomb by creating these tensions in the mines and then refusing to make it safe for people? They knew that someone would be hurt, and by escalating the tensions, cutting wages, threatening miners that they'd be fired and replaced by Chinese miners in the mines here, the UP played a substantial part in what happened. No one else. I'm sure you'll hear argument that they could never have expected it, and we don't know who did it. We know exactly. You heard about the mob that left the mine and spilled into the streets looking for revenge. They didn't just look for any revenge. They wanted out with the Chinese that were threatening their jobs. At the end of the day, there's really no question. There's no question that the way the UP treated all of these miners is deplorable. All of the testimony we heard was how terrible they treated everyone and how they knew exactly what was coming. The whites were mad at the Chinese, the whites were mad at the UP. Everyone was mad and angry, and the UP didn't care because the UP wanted more coal out of the ground and more money in its pocket. There's really no question about what's been done. The question is, what should we do about it? One man's been taken from his wife. She'll never get to raise a family. She'll never get to grow her business. That business, at the time he was killed as a young 30-year-old entrepreneur, was making $25,000 a year. If he would have worked for another 40 years, and he probably would have worked for who knows how long past that, even just a 40-year career would be $1 million in lost income. Is that all we're worth? Are our hopes and dreams, companionship, society, and comfort worth more than our pocketbooks? What we bring home in a paycheck? I sure hope so. When you fill out that verdict form together, the right number to fine for damages for Ming Lee is $10 million. Thank you.
Counsel for the defense?
Your Honor,
Counsel?
counsel,
Counsel.
ladies and gentlemen of the jury, enough! Have you heard what the plaintiff is saying? We need to be a law-abiding community, a law-abiding civilization here in Wyoming if we are to even believe that we should achieve statehood. If there were disputes over pay by the white miners, if there were concerns about safety in the mines, how do we address that as a law-abiding community where we seek to have statehood? It is by addressing those concerns in the legislature, by addressing them in courtrooms like this, and not by going out and butchering people as a violent mob. It is easy in these types of cases to say, it's the fault of institutions. Maybe it's Union Pacific. Maybe it's the federal government. Maybe it's the state, maybe it's the territorial government. Maybe it's the Knights of Labor. But who comprised that mob. Individual people. Individuals who were filled with hatred and with anger, and they sought to take things into their own hands. So I say, enough. Plaintiff's counsel in opening talked about the Chinese as though they are not Americans. We keep saying, we can't have these Chinese doing jobs like this. They fall into the very trap of the miners in saying, these Chinese should not be here. Because what was Union Pacific supposed to do? Run them off? Kill them? Do the very things that the mob did? Form a militia on their own? Hire mercenaries? You heard from the sheriff, you heard from the governor. That could not be done. The reality is, it was the mob, the individuals in the mob who assaulted, who killed, and who unfortunately killed Mr. Lee. We feel terrible for Mrs. Lee. That was a sad thing that happened. But it is not the fault of any institution. It is a fault that exists solely among the miners. The Greek philosopher Diogenes said years ago the following: the mob is the mother of tyrants. The mob was a tyrant. In America, we do not resolve issues of dispute by going out and killing people. At the end of this trial, if we are successful, I do not anticipate that plaintiff's counsel will come and kill us and the judge and the jury. That's not how you resolve things. It has to be resolved in the courts. And now, as far as these Chinese, there's another law that I think is very critical, that we need to consider above all others. In 1776, in July, Thomas Jefferson wrote the following, which became part of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. We know that not a single one of us here are equal. But isn't it beautiful that we can think that we are all in our differences beautiful, and that we have our opportunities irrespective of our race, our religion, our language, our sexual preference, or anything else, human beings entitled to the protection of the law. If plaintiff prevails in this case, that statement by Jefferson, an ideal for our country, will never be true. Our Constitution starts with the statement in its preamble, we the people. The mob did not reflect the people. It reflected violence, anger, and destruction. We have talked about whether or not Union Pacific knew that this type of devastation, this type of mob activity would actually take place. Not one single witness, not even the plaintiff herself, although she tried to dodge it, was able to say that there was this kind of violence that could be expected. The sheriff didn't believe it. The superintendent of the mine didn't believe it. Union Pacific didn't believe it. And our good governor did not believe it. Not one witness was available to say or testify before you today in this trial that, yes, Union Pacific should have known it. And by the way, what was Union Pacific supposed to do if they knew? You got to be able to do something. Should they have hired a militia and had a great big war break out in Rock Springs? No. What they're really saying Union Pacific should have done is get rid of all of the Chinese miners. Do exactly what the mob intended to do. What they seek to have you do, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, plain and clear, as simple as anything, is endorse what those miners did. to join the mob, to laugh with them the night before the grand jury was convened, because you knew the fix was in and the grand jury was not going to indict. To be able to sit back and say, we could do what we did without impunity. Recognize that not one of those murderous miners, not one of the members of the mob has had to pay any punishment for what has taken place in this case. They laugh, they scoff, and they have gone on. If, in this particular case, you award damages of $100, of $10, of $1, or 1 penny, you will have endorsed what those miners did. You will say in Wyoming, mob violence is okay. We know the winds of war are coming this way from Johnson County. We know that large landowners are threatening to drive out small landowners. Wyoming has had enough of this. We know of lynch mobs. It is a time of law and order, exactly as Mr. Logan has said, but not the kind of law and order he advocates, where we go about slaughtering and killing and destroying. That kind of violence cannot be condoned by this jury. Those are individual people, and they have to be individually responsible. Someday, I believe, someone will have looked at this case and said, did that jury have courage? And this jury must have the courage to do what is right. It means, of course, that Ms. Lee will not get any money from Union Pacific. And by the way, the only testimony before this court, other than Mr. Logan's speculation, is that Union Pacific is not a good financial situation. I guess we could break Union Pacific with a big verdict. But the reality is that she made more money than most of us will ever make with her husband in that laundry. She left Rock Springs a wealthy woman. She left Rock Springs, and this is the true great irony of it, by making her money from Union Pacific and from the coal mines too. She turned out all right. Finally, I believe, and this is important, that someday someone may say the following, and I believe it to be important. What has violence ever accomplished? What has it ever created? No martyr's cause has ever been stilled by an assassin's bullet. No wrongs have ever been righted by riots and civil disorders. A sniper is only a coward, not a hero. And an uncontrolled or uncontrollable mob is only the voice of madness, not the voice of the people. The voice of the people can be heard from you tonight. On the jury form, you will see where it talks about the responsibility of others. In this case, the responsibility for what has happened here belongs 100% to others. Those miners, the mob, the mindless, the brutal.
Thank you, counsel. You all.
Thank you, Your Honor. Poor me. I'm the UP. You turned out just fine, didn't you, lady? We're so sorry! We're so sorry! Yeah, it's too late. It's too late for we feel terrible. They never felt terrible before. You know how they felt? Down in that coal mine, do you remember? With that coal miner on the stand, he said there was a dead miner already inside the mine. And what did UP want? They wanted people back to work. Go get that mob and get them back to work. We feel terrible. You know, The UP is more powerful than me. It's more powerful than Governor Warren. Frankly, in a lot of ways, it's more powerful than any other entity in the entire world. You know what it's not more powerful than? You. You people in this courtroom tonight can put a stop to this madness. Ali sat in his laundromat in the corner, a scared, hard-working man. The UP didn't pull the trigger. They didn't need to. They killed him years before. And they'll keep on doing it if you don't put a stop to it. They'll keep on doing it. We don't get very many chances to change one person's life, let alone our entire community, our entire state, our entire future. Each and every one of you that's come here tonight can make a real change. You can tell the UP that this has to stop. You need to be responsible for what you've done. You cannot treat people, minors, people in the community, like property. $10 million. The UP won't do the right thing, but you can. Thank you for your service.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the case is now submitted to you to reach a verdict. You are to talk to no one except each other or to announce that you have reached a verdict. You must base your decision on the evidence, exhibits, and the jury instructions that you've been given. With that, court will be in recess until you have reached a verdict. Bailiff, you can take them to the jury room.
All right.
We from the University of Wyoming came over yesterday for this presentation. I want to thank our great friends at Western Wyoming Community College. They've been amazing hosts. This is a wonderful school you have here. And we really appreciate all that they have done for us, especially Eric Delora, who's the theater person who's now helping by getting the jury in the jury room, and Dr. Mark Niels, who was one of our witnesses. Where is Dr. Niels?
Right here. Right here.
All right, thank you, Dr. Niels. You know that Eric and Mark not only have been working really hard for us today and yesterday, we've been having essentially weekly phone calls since about September to deal with the logistics that have just been amazing to us, and we really appreciate it. This is our 5th annual Spence Law Firm Historic Trial. This is the first time we've gone on the road with one of these. We have them in Laramie, and in fact, this trial will be repeated with other counsel and other witnesses in Laramie on April 15th. For what it's worth, I counted at the peak of the crowd approximately 250 people. We've never had that many people. Congratulations. This has to go to the Spence Law Firm from Jackson and elsewhere, a nationwide law firm that we're very proud of in our state because they provide all the financial support to make this happen. And they also provided one of their partners, Tyson Logan, who is one of the partners at the Spence Law Firm, has donated all of his time to get ready for the trial. So let's. Please understand that this theatrical aspect to this event. This is not a scripted event. The attorneys had some information that was put together from them, actually a pretty big pile of information, and they had to dig through that and then present this case tonight. We were talking in lunch today. If this case had actually been tried, if there had actually been this trial, it would probably be a 2-week trial. We tried to get it done in 2.5 hours. And so you saw how unfair that was to the lawyers when we kept cutting them off because we figured you didn't want to hear for 2.5 weeks or 2 weeks. So we were very unfair to the lawyers. As Judge James pointed out, at some point we wouldn't be cutting them off this way in an actual trial. The trial file was put together based on historic. I believe every document you saw tonight was an actual historic document. They were retyped, right? So many of these documents, when you dig through the historic files, they're on like pink pieces of paper, and you see the back of them. But the actual words of the documents you saw tonight were the actual words. There were some other things in the file that changed a bit, but everything you saw tonight were the actual words, with one exception. We could not find the poster, the Get Out posters. We did find that there were similar posters, and the ones that you saw were based upon some posters. I think it was in Tacoma, Washington, or something like that. So that was one exception. The only document we saw tonight that really wasn't. We never could find the actual. There was strong evidence that there were such posters in Rock Springs and Evanston, but we could not find one. So we had to cheat a little bit on that one. So the file was put together by Caitlin Kravenhoff, who was one of our students. John Chris, who played Mr. Evans, and John is an actor some of you may recognize because he is one of our students. He is also a Western graduate who graced the stage many times. And Caitlin and John, Caitlin served as a student trial director, so she dealt with all things like costumes and all the logistics, and it's a huge job. For that, we'd appreciate it. So in the interest of time, I'm going to cheat a little bit and just have to thank all of our witnesses as a whole. There is some bio information about them. We have a combination of some of our students from the law school in Laramie and another graduate of Western, Mr. Whitehouse, the minor, who as should our other witnesses. But let's thank them. And then Judge James donated all of her time to come over. She is a district court judge in this judicial district. So her chambers are in Grease River. And we should also make special note that the role, as many of you recognize, the role of the governor was played by Representative John Freeman, one representative. Coordinates the high school college programs here at Western. So let's thank our attorneys again. We like to use all-star attorneys. What we do is we pair one currently practicing all-star attorney with one of our all-stars from the third-year class. And our four attorneys were amazing tonight, so we could. It's a big deal for all four of us. It's especially a big deal for an attorney in private practice to get all the time that's required to do an event like this. Although, I mean, it's a big deal. hang in there really well. No, we're very proud of our students. All right, so before we open this up for questions and answers, and is Caleb still here? All right, so now is the time for our. I said at the beginning we would confess as to how we had to change the facts a little bit. So what is well established in the historic record is that Mr. Ali, A.H., last name L.E., owned a laundry, a very successful laundry in Rock Springs. And the circumstances of his death were as they were reported to you tonight. Now, Mr. Whitehouse, there's no indication that Mr. Whitehouse was with the mob at that particular time. He might have been, but instead of having one more witness, we just had him testify to things that are not necessarily associated with him in the historic record. There's really no doubt about how Mr. Lee died, and you heard that tonight, and that's very well in the record that he did die in the fashion described, and may have been the last person killed in the riot. It appears that he was the last person that was killed as a direct result of violence. People died because of smoking,
it's not necessarily
not the only person shot, the last person shot.
like itself. I mean,
Right, now, here's the big confession.
having them.
In order to facilitate this as a wrongful death case, we do not know actually whether or not Mr. Lee was murdered. So we made the assumption that he was, and so Ming Lee is not an actual character
Yeah, I think I'm gonna stick. I'm just gonna
that
cut.
we know of.
Like,
It was
I think I'll stay. What do you
It
think?
was the case that some folks that had businesses, some of the Chinese that had businesses were more likely to have spouses here than the minors. As you saw in the video,
I want to go for
a lot of the people that were minors were sending, or were trying to save money to
having
take
a
it back
beautiful,
to China.
but I
There
can
certainly
find
were some
I
people
wish
that had
but this is probably gonna
spouses, so it's not a ridiculous assumption that we
That's
made,
how
but
it
we
usually
want you
goes
to know
anyways.
that.
I
we
wanted
had
to go for them,
event,
but it's gonna go for the business.
in order for this to be a viable case. So were there any other, John or Caitlin, is there anything else we should confess to? I think that's the big one. What you saw today is a pretty, as I say, the documents you saw were all actually historic documents, reformatted, so you can put them up on the computer. Anything else we should say about the trial file before we go on?
It's been my privilege, and probably the last 10 years, to participate in the trial practice program at the University of Wyoming. Steve Easton is the one that has put that together. It's an amazing program. Put in the time and effort to make this presentation tonight. It takes an awful lot of effort. And I think we owe a great big hand to Steve Easton for what he's done.